Billionaire CEO followed his maid after work. What he discovered totally changed his life. Have you ever trusted someone so much only to realize they never really saw you? I want you to really sit with that for a moment. Think about someone in your life, someone you gave your time, your trust, your heart to, only to find out later they were never truly there for you. They were just passing through, invisible to your pain, your dreams, your silent battles. It's a kind of loneliness that's hard to explain, but if you've ever felt it, you know exactly what I mean. See, I've spent my life trying to read people, trying to understand what makes them tick. But the hardest person to read was the one standing right in front of me every day, the maid who came to clean my house, who I barely noticed beyond the surface. She was quiet, kept to herself, did her work without complaint. I thought I had her figured out because I saw her every day, but I was wrong. There's a difference between seeing someone and really seeing them. And the night I decided to follow her after work, that's when everything changed. What I found out shook me to my core. It wasn't just about her story. It was about what her life revealed about mine, about the world we live in, about the truth we try so hard to avoid. This isn't just some tale about a billionaire CEO and his maid. It's a story about invisibility, about struggle, about the courage it takes to live a life nobody notices, about how sometimes the people who seem to have the least are the ones with the most strength, and how that strength can teach us things no amount of money or power ever could. I want you to ask yourself, what would you have done if you were in my shoes? If you had the chance to see the world through someone else's eyes, what would that change about you? I'm inviting you to be part of this story. Tell me where you're watching from. I want to hear from every corner, every city, every small town, because stories like this don't belong to just one place. They belong to all of us. If stories that speak to truth, pain, resilience, and the messy beauty of human life move you, go ahead and hit subscribe to Mr. Alex Stories. Drop a 1 in the comments if you love hearing stories like this, and if this one's not quite your vibe, drop a 0 so I can bring you something better next time. But whatever you do, stay with me, because what I'm about to share, it might just change the way you see the world. I wasn't always a billionaire, not even close. I came from a place that felt small, crowded, and heavy with the weight of dreams that seemed just out of reach. Growing up, our family lived in a tiny 2-bedroom apartment, a space so cramped we could hear every whisper, every step, every breath from one room to the next. There were 5 of us siblings, all packed in tightly with our mother, the real backbone of our family. My mom, she was something else. She worked herself into the ground, cleaning other people's houses, scrubbing floors until her hands were raw, breathing in the harsh smell of chemicals, coming home exhausted but still managing to smile for us. I remember the way her back ached at night, but she never let it show. She had this quiet strength, a kind of stubborn hope that no matter how hard things got, we'd make it through. That memory, that image of her sacrifice and resilience, never left me. So when I finally made it, when my business took off and the money started coming in, when I moved out of that cramped apartment into a mansion that felt like a palace compared to where I grew up, I promised myself I'd never forget what I'd seen. I told myself I'd always treat my staff with respect, pay them well, and keep things fair. I wanted to honor the struggle I'd come from by making sure others didn't feel invisible like we did. But here's the truth. Success changes you, not always in ways you expect or want. It creeps in, subtle but real. It changes how you see the world, and sometimes how you see the people who serve you. I had a beautiful home, a spotless mansion with shining floors, marble counters, expensive art on the walls, a place where every detail was perfect, except for one thing. I barely knew the people who kept it that way. The staff was a well-oiled machine. They came and went, making sure everything ran smoothly. Cooks prepared meals without a word, drivers drove silently, and cleaners moved through the house like shadows, making sure every corner sparkled. Among them all, there was one woman who stood out to me, not because she wanted to be seen, but because something about her was impossible to ignore. Maria, my maid, quiet as a whisper. Always early, always there before anyone else. Never a complaint. Never a word out of place. She had this way of folding the sheets precise and careful, like she was handling something precious. And sometimes, I'd catch her lingering near the back door, her eyes distant, like she was waiting for something, or someone. I noticed all these little things about her, but I didn't really see her. Not yet. I was wrapped up in my world. Board meetings, business deals, late-night phone calls. I told myself I was doing the right thing by providing jobs, by paying well. But I kept Maria at arm's length. She was part of the background, a fixture of the house, but never truly a person in my world. But one night, everything shifted. Something inside me, maybe a memory of my mom or a quiet voice I hadn't heard in years, told me to follow her after work. Not out of suspicion, but out of curiosity and, I'll admit, a growing sense of guilt. Because if I wasn't really seeing her, then what else was I missing? What parts of life, of people, were slipping right past me? So I followed her. And what I discovered out there, beneath the city lights and hidden from my mansion's glass windows, wasn't what I expected. It wasn't a scandal or a secret life or anything like that. It was something deeper, something that tore open my heart and made me question everything I thought success meant. Because sometimes, the stories of those we overlook are the ones that teach us the most about who we really are, and who we're meant to be. One evening, everything shifted in the most unexpected way. I was at this fancy cocktail party, one of those events where the rich and powerful gather to toast their success, dressed in suits and gowns, laughing a little too loud, feeling untouchable. The kind of night where everyone's playing a role and no one's really being honest. I was standing near the bar when I overheard a group of board members talking about me and my maid. The words cut sharper than I expected. "She's still got that same maid," one said with a sneer like it was a joke. "Bet she's undocumented," another laughed, shaking his head like it was the funniest thing in the world. "Hope he's not dipping into the help," the third added, smirking like they knew some secret I didn't. They were laughing, loud, cruel, careless, and I just stood there, frozen. Not because of what they said, though it stung, make no mistake, but because it hit me like a punch to the gut. I realized I hadn't even stopped to think about who Maria was beyond the title maid. I'd reduced her to a job, a shadow in my mansion, a nameless face behind the curtains. I'd become the very man I swore I'd never be. The man who looked down on people he didn't understand, who took the luxury of ignorance and passed it off as success. That night, as the party raged on and the laughter echoed in my ears, I found myself standing by the window, watching Maria slip quietly out the side gate, like she belonged to another world. Something inside me shifted. I can't explain it fully. Maybe it was guilt, maybe curiosity, or maybe a memory of my mother's hands, worn and strong, and the sacrifices she made that nobody saw. Whatever it was, I did something I still wrestle with every day. I got in my car, no driver, no security detail. Just me, alone, following her through the quiet streets. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I had to see beyond the walls of my mansion, beyond the polite smiles and polished floors. I had to see her world, the one she hid from me and maybe even from herself. The night was dark, the city lights blurry through my windshield. My heart was pounding, not with excitement, but with a heavy mix of shame and anticipation. What I found was nothing like the life I imagined she had. Maria's world was quiet, worn, and raw. A small apartment, barely furnished, with peeling paint and a creaky door. The kind of place you drive past every day without a second thought. But inside that small space was a life full of struggle, hope, and unseen battles. I watched her close the door behind her, her shoulders heavy, her face lined with exhaustion, not just from work, but from carrying a weight I hadn't understood. That night, I saw the truth of what it means to live in the margins, to work so hard you barely have the strength to keep going, to be invisible in a world that only sees you as a role or a stereotype. And I realized I had been living next to a whole life I'd never bothered to understand. It was a moment that changed everything for me, because sometimes it takes stepping outside your own world to see what's been right in front of you all along. What would you do if you saw the person who serves you every day carrying a secret life of pain and perseverance? What if your assumptions were the very thing keeping you blind? I don't have easy answers. But that night was the beginning of a reckoning, a painful, humbling reckoning that forced me to confront not just Maria's story, but my own. Because sometimes injustice isn't loud or violent. Sometimes it's quiet. It's the silence of not seeing, of not caring, of letting people live in shadows while you shine in the light. And that silence, that's the hardest thing to break. I told myself that night as I drove behind Maria's worn-out footsteps that it was about protecting her, that I was just making sure she was safe, that nothing bad happened to her after she left my house, that it was care. But the truth, it was something much heavier. It was guilt. A weight I hadn't allowed myself to feel until that moment. Guilt for the blind spots I'd let grow, for the cold walls I built around myself. Walls made of pride and success and a busy schedule that never left room to really see the people around me. Why did I know my CFO's dog's name, his favorite whiskey, his weekend plans? But I couldn't tell you a single thing about the woman who cleaned the toilets in my office. The woman who was there every morning, wiping the counters, folding the sheets, moving quietly so as not to disturb. Why was I more familiar with the luxury cars in the driveway than the stories in the quiet corners of my own home? As I followed her through the winding streets, the neighborhoods she disappeared into after her long days, I felt my heart tighten. I was driving through places I hadn't been in years, streets where the streetlights flickered and the sidewalks cracked, where kids played barefoot and old men sat on their porches, watching the world turn without much hope. And then the memories came flooding back. That used to be me. Not the billionaire, not the man who signed big checks and gave speeches, but a kid with tired shoes, hustling just to get by, trying to make enough money to keep the lights on at home, to buy groceries, to pay rent. Trying to stay afloat in a world that seemed built to keep me down. But the more success I gained, the more I forgot. I forgot those late nights praying for a break. I forgot the weight of shame when there wasn't enough. I forgot the feeling of being invisible. Maybe it wasn't just that I forgot where I came from. Maybe deep down I forgot who I was supposed to become. Because real success isn't just about the numbers in your bank account or the size of your house. Real success is about holding on to your soul through it all. And I realized I had lost that somewhere along the way. Sitting alone in my car, watching her life unfold in quiet shadows, I felt the walls inside me crack. I didn't know what to do next, but I knew I couldn't go back to pretending. Not anymore. This was the moment I had to confront everything, my past, my present, and what kind of man I wanted to be. Because if I didn't see her, if I didn't see people like Maria, then I was part of the problem. And that truth was harder than any boardroom defeat or financial loss. It was the kind of truth that keeps you awake at night, staring at the ceiling, wondering if you're enough, if you can be better, if you can finally live up to the promise you made to yourself long ago. This story isn't just hers, it's ours. It's about all of us who have ever felt small in a world that says we should be invisible, who have ever carried a secret pain behind a smile, who have ever been forced to choose between survival and dignity. And so, here we are, at the edge of a reckoning, one that will shake everything we thought we knew about power, compassion, and what it means to truly see each other. Stay with me, because what happens next changes everything. She stopped in front of a worn-down building that looked like it had seen better days. Peeling paint, broken windows, a rusted sign hanging crookedly on the door. It wasn't an apartment complex. It wasn't a store or a fancy office. It was something different, a community shelter, a place where hope quietly lived behind those battered walls. I watched from the shadows of my car as she stepped inside. The moment she closed that door behind her, a different world opened up. She peeled off her jacket slowly, like she was shedding the weight of the day, the exhaustion, and the invisible role she played in my life. She changed out of her worn shoes into a pair that looked a little cleaner, a little less tired. Then she moved. No rush, no complaints, just purpose. She started cooking. But here's the thing. She wasn't paid for any of this. There were no schedules telling her when to be here. No paycheck waiting at the end of the month. No contracts or job descriptions. She just showed up, every day. The staff here greeted her like family. They hugged her like they hadn't seen her in weeks. And the children? They didn't call her maid or worker, they called her Mama Maria. She moved with a kind of gentle authority, like this was the place she belonged. Not the mansion, not the business meetings, but here, in this humble shelter, where hope was scarce but fiercely protected. She fed the hungry with hands that looked worn but moved with care. She read stories to little ones who clung to every word, eyes wide with wonder. She cleaned the kitchen, the floors, the tables, like it was her own home, like every crumb mattered because it was a small act of dignity in a world that often strips people of it. And I sat in my luxury SUV parked just outside. The engine was running, the leather soft beneath me, but inside I felt hollow. Not because I had followed her that night, not because I had invaded her space, but because I realized I had forgotten something far more important than my wealth, my status, my success. I'd forgotten what true service looked like. Not the kind measured in paychecks or titles, but the kind that is born from the heart, the kind that shows up every day, even when no one's watching, the kind that gives without expecting anything in return. In that moment, I saw Maria not as my maid or an invisible part of my life, but as a woman with strength, with love, with purpose. A woman who gave more in one evening than I had given in all my years of making it. And suddenly, everything I thought I knew about power and success felt empty. Because real power isn't in the money. Real power is in the love we give, the lives we touch, the hope we carry forward. And if I was going to be better, really better, I had to learn from her. From this quiet queen who ruled not with wealth, but with a heart that refused to give up. The journey I was about to take with Maria was going to change everything, because sometimes the most unexpected people show us the way. And sometimes the hardest lessons come wrapped in the quietest moments. Hold on, we're only getting started. For weeks I kept watching, not like some stranger lurking in the shadows, but like a man caught in a storm of his own conscience, torn between guilt and curiosity, unsure of what he was really searching for. Some nights I'd stay hidden across the street from that shelter, watching the way Maria moved with quiet purpose. The way she smiled at the children who ran to her, how she carried herself as if she was the heart beating in that worn-down building, even when everything outside seemed broken. No matter how heavy her steps were when she left my mansion each morning, her body aching, her face marked with tiredness, she never showed it when she arrived at that place. Instead, she was a light, a steady hand, a mother, a sister, a warrior in a world that often felt like it had turned its back on her. She gave everything she had, her time, her sweat, her love. She didn't just work there, she lived there, breathed there, became something bigger than anyone could see from my polished windows. I couldn't look away. Then, one cold night, after she left the shelter and headed back out into the city's quiet streets, I followed her. This time, I left the safety of my car and trailed her on foot. We passed dark alleys and cracked sidewalks, places I never thought about, places where struggle wasn't just a story in a book or a headline on the news, it was real life every day. She climbed 3 flights of stairs in a building that looked like it was holding itself up by willpower alone. No fancy doorman, no security cameras, just a small door with 3 locks. I stood there, heart pounding, watching her turn the key and slip inside. And that's when I saw it. A small refrigerator magnet holding a photo, tight. A boy, no more than 10 or 11, with eyes so full of hope they burned right through the glass. Her son, a little boy I never knew existed. The weight of that moment hit me harder than any boardroom defeat or failed deal ever could. She wasn't just the woman who cleaned my floors or folded my sheets. She was a mother, a provider, a fighter who worked herself to the bone every day to build a better life for that boy. 3 jobs, 3 different places, 3 sacrifices I had no idea about. And every penny she earned went to make sure he had a chance to go to school, a chance to rise beyond the limits set before him. The first in their family to finish college, a beacon of hope born from the quiet strength of a woman I barely saw. And me? I never asked. I never paused to wonder. I was too caught up in my own world, my own climb, my own victories, my own reflections in the glass towers of power. I was blind to the life behind the silence, blind to the stories wrapped up in the faces I passed every day. And that night, standing in the dim light of her tiny apartment hallway, with the picture of her son etched in my mind, something inside me shattered. It was like I woke up from a dream I didn't know I was living. I realized I wasn't just a man who had made it. I was a man who had forgotten what it meant to see people, to honor their struggles, to recognize their battles, to stand beside them, not above them. Because Maria's story wasn't unique. It was the story of so many people working unseen, unheard, unrecognized. And if I didn't open my eyes, listen, and change, then what was the point of all my success? What kind of man was I if I couldn't see the people who made it possible? That night, I promised myself I'd do better. Not just for her, but for every person who's ever felt invisible. Because sometimes, those who serve us carry the heaviest burdens and the greatest strength. And if we don't see that, then what kind of world are we really building? I didn't know how to fix the damage I'd done, the distance I'd created between myself and the people who helped hold my life together. The blind spots, the assumptions, the cold silence that had built up around me like a fortress. A fortress I had no idea I'd locked myself inside. But one thing I knew for sure: I couldn't just pretend I hadn't seen her story. I couldn't unsee the strength, the sacrifices, the dignity Maria carried every single day, even when no one else bothered to look. So I made a decision, maybe the hardest one I've ever made in my life. I asked her to come sit with me, not in the kitchen where she scrubbed floors and wiped counters, not in the back room where she went unnoticed, but in my office, the place where my name meant power, the place where decisions were made. She was quiet when she arrived, hesitant, unsure if this was a test or a trick. The weight of her years was in her eyes, years of being overlooked, underappreciated, unseen. Her hands trembled as she took the seat across from me. She wasn't used to this. Most people like me didn't ask to hear her story. Most people like me never cared to listen. But that day I did. I listened. And with every word she spoke, the walls I'd built around my heart began to crumble. She told me about the early mornings and late nights, working not one, not two, but 3 jobs to make sure her son never went without. How she sent every penny she could scrape together back home, hoping her sacrifices would give him a chance at a future she never had. She spoke about pride, a fierce, quiet pride that kept her from asking for help, from showing weakness. How she carried the weight of loneliness, the sting of being invisible in a world that saw her only as help. And through her story, I realized how far I'd drifted from where I came from, how much I'd forgotten about who I was supposed to be, not just a man who builds wealth, but a man who builds community, who uplifts, who sees. I told her then, not as a boss, but as a human, that I wanted to change things, that I wanted to do more than just say sorry. So, I promoted her, not because I pitied her, not because I wanted to ease my own guilt, but because she was the most disciplined, compassionate, and loyal person I knew, because she deserved that respect, that dignity. And I promised to fund her son's education, a full scholarship for law school. When I told Maria, tears streamed down her face, the kind of tears that carry years of pain and hope all at once, and I cried too, because in that moment, I felt something deeper than success. I felt redemption, a chance to rewrite not just her story, but mine. To learn that real power isn't measured by the size of your bank account, it's measured by the size of your heart, and the courage it takes to change. From that day on, I vowed never to stop listening, never to stop seeing the people who make this world run, because true greatness isn't about what you take, it's about what you give back. And Maria, with all her strength, all her grace, reminded me that sometimes the greatest leaders are the ones who learn to be humble enough to follow. This is the story of how I found my way back, and how one woman's quiet courage saved more than just herself. It saved me. Some people will never see your worth, not because you don't have it, but because they don't know how to recognize it. Sometimes it takes someone else to open their eyes, but other times, the only person who can truly see your value is you. It's a painful truth, one that cuts deep when you're on the outside looking in, when your efforts go unnoticed, your sacrifices unseen, and your heart weighed down by the quiet loneliness of being invisible. Maria never asked for attention. She never demanded respect. She just did her work. With dignity, with grace, with a strength that ran deeper than most could understand. She lived with purpose, not because she wanted to be celebrated, but because she had to be. For herself, for her son, for every small life she touched. And following her that night, maybe it wasn't about her at all. Maybe it was about me. Because somewhere along the way, I lost myself. I had the money, the power, the status, but I'd forgotten the one thing that really matters: humanity. I was so busy climbing that ladder, I didn't stop to see who was holding it steady at the bottom. Was I wrong for following her? Was I invading her privacy? Crossing a line? I wrestled with those questions for days, weeks. But then I realized, sometimes breaking the rules is what it takes to break free, to break open your heart and your mind, to see beyond the surface and finally understand what's real. That night was the crack in my armor, the moment I realized my wealth and success meant nothing if I was blind to the people who made it possible. Maybe what broke me was also what saved me. Because to really grow, you have to be willing to fall apart, to be humbled, to confront your own failures, your blind spots, your mistakes, and then to rise, stronger, wiser, more compassionate. This story isn't just about Maria, it's about all of us, about the invisible people in our lives, the ones we take for granted, the ones who carry burdens we'll never know, who fight battles we'll never see. It's about remembering that everyone has a story, a struggle, a dream, a hope. And it's about the choice we make every single day to see each other, really see each other, because that's how change begins. So if this story touched you, if it shook something loose inside you, I want to hear from you. Tell me, how would you have handled it? Would you have followed her? Would you have listened? Would you have acted? And if you know someone out there who goes unnoticed, uncelebrated, unappreciated, someone who feels invisible or forgotten, send this story to them. Let them know. We see you now. We see your worth. We see your struggle. We see your strength. Because your story matters. And sometimes, just knowing someone is watching, really watching, can be the difference between hope and despair. Thank you for sharing this time with me, for opening your heart to a story that's real, raw, and all too human. If you care about stories that speak truth, pain, resilience, and justice, subscribe to this channel. Drop a 1 in the comments if you want more stories like this. Drop a 0 if you want me to tell a different kind of story next time. Your voice matters too. And wherever you're watching from, please tell me in the comments. Let's build a community that lifts each other up, one story at a time, because in the end, that's what we all need. To be seen, to be heard, to be valued. And maybe, just maybe, that's how we begin to heal this broken world together.